is what actually happens when your foot hits the ground. That's how we're going to look at this differently. It's not a squat, it's not a deadlift, it's something completely different. So how do we make a more powerful hinge? Oh, here's some of their work. This is how fast the different limbs are moving comparatively with where they are in the gait cycle. And again, we can see how fast stuff works at different points, but I think the key here is that everything is hip dominant. It's from proximal to distal, that the acceleration has to come from the hip. And I'm afraid in the weight room, a lot of the stuff, it's reversed, where it's distal to proximal, like a leg extension, where you're pushing your leg up against something with the hope of moving it through. Whereas in this case, you are actually driving, you're whipping with your hip to create literally a whip into the ground. And again, that's not stealing that from anyone but Franz Bosch. He was the first person that came out with the concept of whip from the hip. The faster that whip comes in the ground, and if the ankle can absorb all that energy, you're going to return that energy. So torque curves, I think from this we see that during the stance phase, it is all muscle and dealing with ground reaction force, which I think we all knew that. But the swing phase is muscle and limb velocity. And I think what's interesting about this is that it's actually the muscle that is stopping, slowing down, and accelerating the limb. There's nothing really pulling on it because you're not on the ground, but that's what the muscles do in that phase. Again, that's why we like the Lila Exogen, is you're actually overloading that principle to accelerate and decelerate the limb. Joint powers. This is what's working when it's on the ground. You can see that in the air, there's not a lot going on, but when we hit, there is a double spike in the ankle. First is contact, a repositioning, a stabilization, and then a huge push from the ankle. And I'm going to get into that, the importance of training that double spike when we hit the ground. And then you have a huge plantar flexion moment coming off the ground. Not a lot going on from the knee the whole way through, and some from the hip, which is kind of interesting. And here's the actual numbers in watts. 4,000 watts is a lot. And if you compare that with what's going on at the knee, you'll see just how important not only extensors are, but flexors are as well in the hip joint. And again, that hip flexor is going to be that swing leg coming through. And then again, if you look to the far right, you can see just how much work the plantar flexors do in the ankle, that they are equal to the hip. But how much time do we spend on plantar flexion in the weight room? Very little. It's usually the end of the workout. So, if we're going to get a good exercise, we have to have something here that's going to pull you into the ground to try to deal with the ground reaction force. And then we have to try to deal with swinging that joint while we are trying to hold the ground. I'm going to give you a second to read this, or you can pause. So to sum up so far, hip extensors have to create the torque to pull the body. Hips and knees have to deal with ground reaction force. Hamstrings have to accelerate and decelerate and reaccelerate the shank. Ankles absorb a lot and push a lot. And where we see that contact point, that is where all the business happens. That is the highest point of torque forces into the ground. So knee swinging through, everything is meeting at the midpoint, and with the arms swinging, all the power is happening right at that point. So if we start looking at it from a gait standpoint, let's start with the pre-swing, where we're about to swing the leg down. Again, we saw from that chart, not a lot is actually working there, but stuff is moving quick. So we have to move those legs through very quickly. And here's one point that I think we all miss in the weight room. This is from 2018, and there's been papers since, but the role of the thigh and the psoas major muscularity and its relation to running mechanics and sprinters. Most quad muscles are negatively correlated with speed except for the rec fem, which is highly correlated. It plays a significant role in sprinting speed. But how much time do we spend working on your rec fem? We spend all of our time on the other quad muscles. You also have these good sprinters also have a larger psoas muscle as well. Peak moment for rec fem is touchdown of the opposite leg. So when we are doing all of our hip flexion work, I think everyone does a high knee action where you're bringing your knee up, and some people get hip flexor problems or it seems to hurt, but really it's when the knee is passing the other, which is the peak moment for the rec fem. So that means most of your rec fem work has to be, you're just trying to get your one knee to pass the other knee and stop. I think if we're strengthening the end point, you have to reverse that and bring it down. We want the moment to happen down low and let gravity decelerate that limb, because it actually has to decelerate by 78% before you can reverse it. So we want the speed to happen early, not late. So early swing phase, you can work, and psoas work eccentrically and concentrically, so they work together. One is working eccentrically, the other concentrically, and they flip roles. And the vasti, that's the bigger quads that you use when you do your squats, aren't necessary to run faster than 9 meters a second. They fire too fast. So they're basically stabilizers, so you don't need to do as much. They don't do as much at faster speeds. And your hip flexor, your rec fem is biarticulate, so you always need to add a little kick. And I think this is where it gets interesting, is the fact that your hamstrings are biarticulate and your rec fem is biarticulate, and they work together to move that limb through. So you have to acknowledge the biarticulate nature of the rec fem just like you do with your hamstrings, which we're going to get to exercise to show it. And again, I've said this before, but most of the muscles that are working when you sprint are really moving that limb. Which again, if we want to truly strengthen that, we are going to wear, wearables. We're going to weight down that limb by a couple 100 grams. And now we're actually using the muscles for max velocity the way they're supposed to be used, and train those muscles in that fashion. So, again, I've mentioned some of this, and here what gets interesting is the fact that in all of our previous science, we look at hamstring ratios as a knee flexor extensor. But really what we should be looking at if we're trying to figure out why the hamstring's coming apart or how we can get faster is how they both work as torque muscles. And now let's start looking at the balance between those two. So if that's off, and your body knows it, your body's going to undo or pull back on some power output, knowing that the balance is off, to slow down that limb. Again, which is a reason why we need to work so much on our rec fem. So in real basic, you can start with leg swings. I mean, that's the most basic exercise you can do to work rec fem. This is acknowledging that workloads on hamstrings were high. This also shows that the initiation has to come from the hip, which again is why we do pendulum swings. And the problem is Nordics recruit from distal to proximal. You're anchoring your foot down and pulling from that point. I know there's a lot of research out there that says Nordics are good, but look who's doing the research. They own Nord boards and things like that, those companies. And there's probably a role for them, but from this viewpoint, it may not be a great exercise. So the key to limb velocity after toe off, the key is the swing velocity after the rapid flexion of the knee after toe off. So as soon as that toe comes off the ground, you've got to start to pull it through, because the speed has to happen early, because by the time you reverse it, you have to reduce by 78% and then re-accelerate after that point. So our exercises need to be from behind. Your knee, your swing leg knee has to be behind, and how fast can you bring it through to slightly past midpoint so the knee passes. So again, like I said, leg swings, you can do leg cycles and stop. Banded cycles up to a box, four-way hip, all these things can have an impact on swinging that leg. So if we're going to swing, here's a bad example. So you can see his whole core falls apart as he bobs forward. His sum of his mass moving forward is a hinge. Half of his body's going backwards when he lifts up that leg. That is not a good hinge. Compared to here on the right, where now he is stabilizing his core and his whole body can move forward as he pulls through. Better exercise would be have that leg start further behind or on top of a box, but I'll show that in a minute here. I like leg shakes because you get it moving and then you stop it. Get the speed out in front. A lot of people, this is more of a torso exercise to control your torso while you bring your leg up and shake. Again, if you've got a group of kids, this is easy to have a group do standing in line while they're waiting to run their fly 10s. Brace your torso and start to swing it back and forth. Two different versions. The guy on the right is pretty fast. You can see there's some control issues with fatigue compared to someone who is close to elite. He starts to get it going and it's smooth. There's no pause. It just becomes very natural. Again, it becomes a neurologic feature that how well can you control that leg after 5, 6, 7 seconds. We're great at doing drills for a couple seconds, but can you do 20 or 30 together to actually get some bang for your buck? For hip torque, you can do snap downs. Great for acceleration and top end speed. I like cycling up to, you got it. Cycling up to the box, get some speed going, and now with that early contact, it's an overspeed. You have to create pre-tension in your hamstring to step up and pull yourself through. Marshals are for repositioning the limbs. You get pulled down faster, you get as wide as you can, trying to get that 105 degrees and come down. Onto a single leg, this gets hard. And jump out. Now up onto an early box, and so you get that pre-contact, that pre-tension in the hamstring to pull through. It's just a simple hamstring pull down. I would probably use a lighter band. Green is pretty heavy. We want to stay pretty light on that and work velocity. And here is, again, a hamstring reversal. We're going to get that leg on and off the platform as quickly as can while it's banded. So you're asking that hamstring to accelerate and deaccelerate that leg coming on and off.